All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Pearly Health Center of Excellence webinar series. My name is Dan McEwen, and I'm the Knowledge Translation and Outreach team member here at Pearly Health. Pearly Health is a unique and innovative campus of care. It's home to more than 600 seniors and veterans living in independent apartments or receiving long-term care. Pearly Health is also a center for research, education, and clinical and therapeutic services. The Pearly Health Center of Excellence leads and participates in innovative initiatives, research, and knowledge translation activities that help advance the quality of care for older adults living with frailty. So before I introduce our speakers for today, I want to let people know that there will be time at the end of the presentation for some questions. And you can do so by writing them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So feel free to enter your questions at any point. We also ask that you take a minute or two at the end to complete the short survey that will appear on your screen when you exit the webinar. So Zack Van Allen is a Mitak Banting Discovery Postdoctoral Fellow with Pearly Health Center of Excellence in Frailty-Informed Care. And he's at my alma mater, the School of Rehabilitation Sciences at the University of Ottawa. His research interests include predictive modeling, network dynamics, health, well-being, behavior change, and artificial intelligence. During his PhD, Zack applied machine learning and network analysts to understand how health behaviors interact over time to influence health outcomes. His postdoctoral work focuses on statistical modeling of large cohort datasets, such as the Canadian Longitudinal Study of Aging and the Survey of Health, Aging and Retirement from Europe, and he is supervised by Dr. Mathieu Bourgueneuf. Maybe you can say it better for me, Zack. All right, so without further ado, please welcome Zack Van Allen.
Hello, everyone. I'm just sharing my screen here. Very good. All good, Dan, for the screen share? Yep. All right. Hello, everyone. That was a great introduction, Dan. So as Dan mentioned, my name is Zack Van Allen. I recently completed my PhD in psychology from the University of Ottawa, and now I'm a year into my postdoctoral fellowship. And today I'll be discussing a series of studies that coalesce around the idea of furthering our understanding of functional independence with data from large cohort studies. Before I begin, I would just like to acknowledge that my research has been made possible through a Mitak Banting Discovery Postdoctoral Fellowship and by the University of Ottawa, and also by the Pearly Health Center for Excellence. And again, my work is supervised by Mathieu Bourgueneuf from the Faculty of Sciences at U Ottawa. Just as a brief overview of today's webinar, I'll begin with a discussion of what functional limitations are in the context of my research. And then I'll take some time to discuss two studies. The first study looks to identify which factors are associated with functional independence, and then also to use these factors to predict independence over time. And then the second study looks at the preventative role of physical activity for maintaining functional independence, specifically for people who have and have not experienced a stroke event. Just as a quick note here to say that the first study I'll talk about is currently under peer review, but it's not yet published, and it's available as a preprint online. And the second study has recently been published in the Physical Therapy Journal, and this work has been done in collaboration with my co-authors, Natalie Dion, Dan Orschlitz, and Mathieu Bourgueneuf. So let's just start by discussing what we mean by functional independence. So at its core, functional independence refers to an individual's ability to perform everyday tasks without assistance. And it's really a crucial aspect of healthy aging and quality of life. And it's related to the concept of frailty, although it's a distinct concept. So to measure functional independence, researchers and healthcare professionals often look at two main categories of activities. activities of daily life, or ADLs, and instrumental activities of daily living, or IADLs. So ADLs are the basic self-care tasks that we perform every day. So these include things like bathing, getting dressed, eating, using the washroom, being able to transfer and move around, and also walking. And then IADLs, on the other hand, these instrumental activities of daily living. These are more complex tasks that allow an individual to live independently in a community. And these include things like being able to manage your finances, shopping for groceries, preparing for meals, taking prescribed medications, being able to communicate with a phone or other communication devices, and then manage your own transportation. So the ability to perform these activities independently is crucial for maintaining autonomy and as well as quality of life. However, various factors such as aging or chronic conditions or events like stroke can impact a person's functional independence. And just a quick note here. So functional limitations as are measured by ADL and IADL, they're distinct from the concept of frailty, but they do overlap in terms of how some of their measurement characteristics and their functional definitions. So this Venn diagram here just shows a sample of 1,000 people and whether or not they were frail, had functional limitations, or comorbid conditions. And as you can see, there's just a fair amount of overlap between these constructs. But I just wanted to flag now that they're related but distinct concepts, and I'll come back to this later in the presentation. Back to functional limitations specifically, and just a little bit of background about why this is important. So one of the reasons that it's important to study this topic is that functional limitations in the population are really set to exacerbate in the future, just due to an increasing proportion of the population that will be advanced and become more advanced in age. So for example, in 2020, there are around 1 billion people who are aged 60 years or older, but that number is expected to double by around 2050. And the population aged 80 plus is expected to triple by around 2050. So this really highlights the importance of early identification and preventative methods that can allow for timely interventions that prevent or delay the onset of functional limitations. And when an individual struggles with these activities, refer to it as functional dependence, meaning that people are become dependent on others to complete their daily tasks. And the impact of this functional dependence can be really profound, both for individuals and a society as a whole. So most importantly, for individuals, the loss of independence can lead to a lower quality of life, increase the risk of isolation, and a kind of greater reliance on caregivers and institutional care. And that's really the important part, but kind of in aggregate, there's reasons at a societal level why we would want to help people maintain their independence, just including increased healthcare costs, greater demand for long-term services, and the burden on family or caregivers. So given these impacts, it's really crucial that we identify those at risks of functional dependence as early as possible. And early identification allows for kind of timely interventions that may prevent or delay the onset of functional limitations. And these interventions could include physical therapy or occupational therapy, lifestyle modifications, or targeted medical treatments. Okay, so let's begin with the first study. So this study was entitled Prospective Classification of Functional Independence, Insight from Machine Learning in 39,927 participants in the Canadian Longitudinal Study of Aging. So the primary objective of this study was to identify the variables that best predict functional dependence in adults. And, excuse me, we wanted to understand which factors, when measured today, could help us forecast who might struggle with daily activities in the future. So that was the main objective. And then as a secondary objective, we were interested in which statistical methods or models were best suited for this task. So there's been some previous research on this topic that have identified some predictors of developing functional limitations. So for example, being older, having pre-existing functional limitations, having cognitive impairments or depression, these have all been indicated as early indicators of developing future functional limitations. However, each of these previous examples have been limited by small samples or really focus on a small subset of potential predictors. So in our approach, we used a large data set, the Canadian Longitudinal Study of Aging, or the CLSA, which contains thousands of different measured variables. And then we applied a machine learning approach to better understand which predictors are associated with functional independence. So for this research, again, we use the Canadian Longitudinal Study, or the CLSA. So this is a large-scale, long-term study that follows individuals, 50,000 individuals aged 45 to 85 for at least 20 years, over a period of 20 years. And it's really a treasure trove of information on the kind of changing biological, medical, psychological, social, and economic aspects of people's lives. And in our study, we analyzed data from nearly 40,000 of these participants. We used data that was collected at a baseline assessment between 2010 and 2015. And then we used data from a follow-up assessment from 2018 to 2021. So on average, there is about a 6-year gap between these time points. So we were interested in identifying which variables at the baseline time point were most strongly associated with IADL at the follow-up assessment. And here for activities of daily living, we used a measure that assesses both ADL and IADL, and it was a binary available. So the people have no or mild limitations, or kind of moderate, severe, or total limitations. So the first issue that we had was with these variables, and we wanted to find which variables were most predictive. However, the CLSA contains thousands of different variables. So the first question we needed to address was which one of these variables, like age or sex or your health status, which were most associated with functional limitations 6 years down the road. So we reduced a list of 4,000 candidate variables down to 18 different key factors that were associated with functional limitations. We did this by looking at the relationships between each variables and functional limitations separately, and then we just selected those with the strongest associations. So these were the 18 variables that we identified. So being more advanced in age is associated with more functional limitations, sex, retirement status, whether or not a person received formal home care in the last year, whether there are pre-existing chronic conditions, having a full driver's license, previous functional limitations, whether or not people reported being pain-free was a key indicator, as well as their perceived subjective health. There are a few other ones here that are notable: grip strength, walking frequency, so how often did you go for a walk over the last week? Memory was also a key indicator, psychological distress, visual acuity, how well is your vision, and then walking speed. So this is a test about how long does it take to walk 4 meters. So these were the 18 variables that we identified to be most strongly associated with future functional limitations. So then the second set of questions we wanted to answer was, well, how well can we predict whether someone will be independent? And then also which statistical model is best for this task? So to address these questions, we used a machine learning approach. So just briefly, the way we did this analysis was we took our big data set with 40,000 participants, and then we split it into 2 different data sets. So one used data sets to train our models, and the other was used to test how well our models performed. And then the training data was also split into several different smaller data sets through a process called cross-validation. So we did this so that we could experiment with many different models and variables to find the algorithm that was best able to classify whether a person was going to report functional limitations based on their baseline data. So there are different types of algorithms or models or way to summarize the data. And it wasn't clear to us which one would be the best for our particular research questions. So to address this, we used several different models on the training data, and then we compared the examples. So for example, we compared logistic regression models, neural networks, naive Bayes, and then a few tree-based algorithms, such as random forest and XGBoost. So we compared all of these models together, and we assessed their performance on their ability to correctly classify whether a person would have functional limitations in the future. And this chart shows how well each of the models performed. And as you can see, all these lines are pretty close together, so they all performed actually pretty similar. But we found a logistic regression model ended up performing the best. So we have this model that we trained on our training data. And then in the final step, we take this logistic regression model, and then we use the test data to kind of evaluate how well it's able to classify functional dependence on data that it hasn't been exposed to. So what we found was that our best performing model, which was the logistic regression model, could predict functional dependence with about 82% accuracy. So this means it correctly identified both those who would and wouldn't develop functional limitations 82% of the time using these 18 variables that we identified earlier. So what does this mean? Well, it suggests that we can predict with reasonable accuracy who might develop functional limitations over a 6-year period. And this has some implications for healthcare and aging policies. And then we take a look a bit deeper at which specific variables were most associated with functional dependence. We found that being more advanced in age, reporting psychological distress, taking longer to complete a short walk, reporting subjective health, and having more than one chronic condition at baseline. These were all associated with having greater odds of reporting limitations 6 years down the road. And then in contrast, we found that several variables were associated with being more independent later in life. And these included not having limitations at baseline, having a strong grip strength at baseline, not having any chronic conditions, being a woman, and having an unrestricted driver's license. So when considering the results of this study, we identified 18 variables that can be used to classify functional independence with 82% accuracy. When we started this study, one of the things we were interested in was using environmental data, such as air quality or how close people live to green spaces as a predictor of functional independence. But we didn't find any evidence that those factors were associated with functional limitations. And then in comparing and contrasting these findings with the existing literature, we actually found that this task was quite more difficult than we anticipated for a couple of reasons. Mostly, we were unable to find other predictive modeling studies that use functional limitations as the main outcome. It's just not commonly done. So we had to compare results to those that used a related but distinct outcome of frailty. Now, again, these concepts are not exactly the same, so take these comparisons with a grain of salt. But there's a fair amount of overlap between these constructs. And when we do make these comparisons, we find that our model performed quite well compared to others, especially considering that we had a time frame of about 6 years, which is quite a bit longer than other predictive modeling studies, and longer time frames are harder to make predictions with. So overall, the model performed quite well. So what are the implications for this study? Healthcare providers could use these predictors to identify high-risk individuals early on. And this could allow for more targeted interventions, which could potentially prevent or delay the onset of functional dependence. It's also worth noting that many of these predictors are modifiable factors. So things like physical activity, which is reflected in your walking speed and how often you go for walks during the week, psychological health, management of chronic conditions. These are all areas where early interventions could make a difference. So that's good news. And there's also some evidence that cognitive performance can be maintained with exercises. So there's certainly some potential for preventative interventions, which is positive. However, it's important to acknowledge the limitations of the study. So while our model performed well, it's not perfect. There's still a margin of error. And we need to be careful about over-relying on predictions at an individual level. Additionally, our study was based on a Canadian population, so the results might not fully generalize to other countries with different healthcare contexts, but for us in Canada, it's the right population to generalize. And then also we excluded biological data from our prediction model just because we didn't have the expertise to interpret that, but that's something that can be included in the future. So one potential next step that we're considering is to develop an online survey tool that uses the algorithm that we developed so that individuals could input their data and determine their likelihood of developing functional dependence in the future. Another thing we're thinking through is preventative interventions. Using these indicators and trying to intervene earlier to see if that changes whether or not people develop limitations. So in conclusion, this study provides a tool for identifying those at risk of functional dependence, and it highlights key areas for potential intervention, and it opens up some new avenues for personalized preventative care in aging populations. So that was study one. So now let's turn our attention to the second study, which was entitled Pre-Stroke Physical Activity Matters for Functional Limitations, a longitudinal case control study of 12,860 participants. So this study focuses on pre-stroke physical activity and its impact on functional limitations. And this study kind of expands on the idea that we talked about, that physical activity can be an effective preventative method for maintaining one's functional independence. So the main objective of the study was to examine how physical activity before a stroke affects your functional limitations after a stroke. And we were particularly interested in comparing this effect in stroke survivors to a matched group of individuals who hadn't experienced a stroke. So just in terms of some background, this study focused on people who have and have not experienced a stroke. We thought this was an important population to study for several reasons. The first is that the prevalence of stroke cases, which are they're estimated to be about 100 million worldwide. And each of these people are losing an average around 1.4 years of full health due to their stroke. So it's really having a really big impact on people's lives. And this amounts to around 1.2 million years of lost health over a period of about 3 decades. And importantly for this study, stroke events are often associated with the development of functional limitations. So what we were interested in this study was the role of physical activity in the development of functional limitations in people who have and haven't experienced a stroke. There has been some prior research on this topic, however, the results have been mixed. Some research has found that higher levels of pre-stroke physical activity is associated with greater independence after a stroke, while other studies haven't found this effect. In the studies that haven't found this effect, there were some limitations. These studies often used one-eyed measures to assess functional limitations, and also used smaller sample sizes. So we were interested in designing a study that didn't have these limitations. So for this research, we used data from the Survey of Health, Aging, and Retirement in Europe, or the SHARE study. So this is also a large international study, and it collected data from over 140,000 different individuals, age 50 and older, across 28 European countries and also Israel. So we analyzed data that was collected every 2 years from 2004 to 2022. And this really gave us a long-term view of kind of health and aging over time. So we were interested in a kind of select set of variables. These included physical activity levels, age, sex, body mass index, ADL and IADL, chronic condition, country of residence, and stroke status. So the way that functional limitations were measured in the SHARE study was by having counts of ADL, activities of daily living, and of IADL, instrumental activities of daily living. So for example, if someone reported difficulties with 2 of the activities of daily living, they would have a score of 2. And the same goes for IADL, which was measured a little bit differently, but mostly the same as before. So the instrumental activities of daily living assessed a person's ability to use a map, to prepare a hot meal, to go shopping, to make phone calls, to take their prescribed medication, to complete housework autonomously, and to manage their money. So in terms of the study participants, our study included 2,143 stroke survivors. And then also we included 10,717 individuals who hadn't experienced a stroke. And we matched these people in these groups based on factors like age, sex, body mass index, and initial functional status, just to compare, to ensure a fair comparison between the groups. And we used the technique called propensity score matching to achieve this. So we matched 5 stroke-free individuals for every 1 stroke survivor. And then we looked at the 2 main types of functional limitations, those with activities of daily living and those instrumental activities of daily living. And we did this in 2 separate analyses. We also categorized participants by their physical activity level. So whether people were physically active or physically inactive generally, based on their reported frequency of moderate and vigorous physical activity. And then each of these groups completed surveys 8 different times. So in the stroke survivor group, all the measurements were taken after these folks had reported a stroke event. And then in the stroke-free group, they were just kind of matched in time for a comparison comparator group. And these 8 surveys that people completed between over these kind of 16 years, these surveys measured the number of functional limitations that people experience. So this was the repeated measures aspect that we were assessing. And we used a linear mixed effect model. Individual observations were nested within individuals and then compared between groups. And we also statistically controlled for a few different variables, such as age, sex, chronic condition status, and education level. We did this just to ensure that our results reflect the relationship between physical activity and functional limitations, and not other variables that could be associated with functional limitations. Okay, so let's talk about what we found. And first, we'll focus on the results for ADL, so activities of daily living. And this chart here shows the measurement waves on the horizontal axis, so 1 to 8. And then on the vertical axis shows the limitations in IADL, where higher scores mean more limitations, specifically with ADL. So not a lot of limitations here, going from 0 to 2, so the numbers were quite small. And then we have stroke-free adults here represented in these blue lines. And the solid lines are for physically active individuals who engage in moderate to vigorous physical activity more than once a week. And then we have these dashed lines, which represent the physically inactive individuals who engaged in physical activity less than 1 time a week. So what we can see here is that participants were physically inactive at baseline. These participants reported more functional limitations over the 8 survey waves, and the people who were physically active reported fewer limitations. So this is perhaps not surprising. This is what we would expect to find. However, now let's look at the stroke survivors. And all of this is the post-stroke. So these people who were matched to be as similar as possible as the stroke-free group in terms of the demographic characteristics. And as we can expect, stroke survivors reported more limitations in the stroke-free group. Additionally, we can see, again, the effect of physical activity for those who were inactive reported more limitations for those who were active. But finally, and most importantly, we found that the benefit of physical activity was stronger in the stroke survivor group than in the matched group without stroke. So in other words, being physically active before a stroke did seem to provide extra protection against ADL limitations after the stroke. And this was held true beyond this kind of general effect of the benefits of physical activity. So then we looked at the IADL separately for the instrumental activities of daily living. And we found that physical activity was beneficial for both groups again, but we didn't see this significant interaction effect in the strength of the effect between stroke survivors and non-stroke survivors. So in conclusion, we observed that pre-stroke physical activity was associated with fewer ADL limitations over a 16-year period across 17 countries. And that this effect was stronger for stroke survivors than for stroke-free comparison group. And there are a few reasons why this could be the case. So for example, pre-stroke physical activity could increase brain plasticity through the upregulation of growth hormones, such as brain-derived neurotropic factors. But that's just a hypothesis. Another explanation could be that the benefit of pre-stroke physical activity on depression, which has been shown to be associated with ADL limitations. But these are just kind of hypotheses. Our study wasn't designed to kind of identify whether this, why this effect happened, just to identify whether the effect was there. And we did find that effect. So there's some future research that's needed. So these findings have some important implications. They suggest that encouraging physical activity isn't just about general health promotion. It really could be a crucial strategy for maintaining functional independence in the event of a stroke. And this is particularly relevant for older adults who are higher risk of stroke. And then for healthcare providers, especially people like physical therapists, these results really underscore the importance of promoting physical activity as a preventative measure. And again, it's not really just about the health benefits, it's about, or the immediate health benefits, it's about building a reserve of functional capacity that could be crucial in the event of a health crisis like a stroke. However, as with any study, there are some limitations to consider. So we relied on self-report data for physical activity and for stroke occurrence. And there's some issues with this. It can be subject to recall bias, etc. And we also didn't have detailed information about the severity of stroke or the different type of stroke. It just wasn't available in the data set. And this could influence functional limitations. So the differences in the type of stroke or the type of impairment resulting from the stroke, it might be why we observed an effect in ADLs but not IADLs. But we're not exactly positive on that. So in conclusion, this study provides some strong evidence for the long-term benefits of physical activity in maintaining functional independence, particularly in the context of a stroke. It also highlights the need to consider pre-stroke physical activity levels when predicting functional outcomes after a stroke, and again emphasizes the role of physical activity in preventative healthcare strategies. So just as we wrap up kind of the presentation of these two studies today, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned from these studies and consider the kind of broader implications for healthcare and aging research. So first, our study on prospective classification of functional dependence showed that we can predict with reasonable accuracy who might develop functional limitations over a 6-year period. We identified 18 key predictors, ranging from age to chronic conditions to grip strength and walking speed. And this predictive ability opens up some exciting possibilities for intervention and personalized care. And then our second study highlighted the crucial role of physical activity in maintaining functional independence, especially in the context of stroke over a 16-year period. And we found that being physically active before stroke offered significant protection against functional limitations afterwards, beyond this general effect of beyond the general benefits of physical activity. So what kind of I've learned over this year of working in this area is really that functional limitations is kind of multi-faceted in its determinants, and it's influenced by really a wide range of factors. But fortunately, many of these factors are modifiable, which opens up some opportunities for preventative interventions, which I think can and should be developed for this context. And early identification of at-risk individuals is possible. And I think it's a promising avenue of future research to kind of turn this algorithm that we developed into a kind of calculator where people can assess their own risk for developing functional limitations. And then lastly, physical activity really plays a crucial role in maintaining functional independence, particularly in the face of health challenges like a stroke. In terms of implications for healthcare providers, I don't think we need more evidence that physical activity is important, but we have some more, and the same for policymakers. If we can really get more physical activity interventions, we'll probably see some public health benefits from that. And then for individuals, for most individuals, the good news is that their modifiable risk factors can really have a large effect on the quality of life. In terms of conclusions, I think there's some, looking to the future, there's some exciting directions for research. I think we need to develop and test some interventions based on our predictive models to see if we can effectively prevent or delay decline in high-risk individuals. I think exploring how these findings apply to different populations and cultural contexts is a fruitful avenue of potential research. There's also potential to integrate more detailed health data, such as biomarkers or neuroimaging, to refine our predictive models to see if we can beat our 82% benchline. And then also we can investigate which kind of optimal types of intensities of physical activity are optimal for maintaining functional independence in different populations. So just in conclusion, understanding and promoting functional limitations or promoting functional independence is crucial as our global population ages. And our research contributes to this goal by identifying key predictors of functional decline and highlighting the importance of physical activity and maintaining independence. By applying these insights, I think we can work towards a future where more people can maintain their independence and the quality of life as they age. So thank you for your attention, and I'd be happy to answer any other questions.
Wow, Zach, thank you so much for presenting the results of those two studies. Very encouraging stuff that you're doing. As we wait for questions to come in, I've got one for you, if that's okay. Can you give me an elevator pitch on machine learning? I mean, how did you go through 12,000 participants in those studies with so many variables?
Yeah, so that's a good point. There's kind of two parts to that. The first is reducing the big list of variables down into a manageable one. And so the way that we did that was just by looking at each individual variable and their association with the outcome. So we get a strength of relationship between like age and strength and functional limitations, or sex and functional limitations. So then we have a giant list of kind of the strength of their associations, and then we can just filter by which is the strongest. So that'll get us to the top kind of like 20 or 30. And then it's really a matter of trial and error and finding the right combinations of models and variables that kind of maximize the predictive value or the ability to predict who's going to have functional limitations. So that's really how we went through that phase of the project.
Perfect. Thanks for explaining that for us. So let's get to the question. Sui asks, and she says, thank you so much for your presentation. For study 1, have you considered exploring if nutrition risk measured by the screen 8 in this CLSA at baseline is associated with IADL?
We did. So that was one of the variables in the CLSA, but we found that it didn't have strong associations with the outcome variables. It's been a while since I did the analysis, but I think it was one of those that was kind of on the edge, where it had some association, but then it didn't make the models any better, so that we didn't include them. So it was kind of weakish associations that when they were included in the model, they didn't make it stronger. So they ultimately weren't included in the final model. But thanks for your question.
Perfect. All right, got another one for you from Dr. Jutai. In your analysis of prediction of functional independence, did you examine how accurately you could classify individuals using your statistical model?
Yeah, so that would be the 82%, the overall. So that's a measure both of classifying who had functional limitations and who was functionally independent. So that overall 82% accuracy was the ability to classify functional limitations. I think that was the question.
Yeah, just about how you examined how accurately you could classify individuals using your model.
Yeah. So about 82%, but that's the baseline. And if we continue with this, that'll be what we want to beat going forward.
Sounds good. All right, question here from Kathy, wondering, do you have any insight regarding engagement factors that would increase commitment to physical exercise when we see the obvious personal advantage for doing so?
I mean, that's a great question. I think there's hundreds, if not more people who are working on this because it's such an obvious next step, but it's also very hard. I know some people who are working on explaining physical activity in terms of effort minimalization. So we often don't want to expend effort. It's just like, oh, that's hard, so we don't want to do it. So that's kind of one reason, and people are developing interventions based around kind of making physical activity more fun. So you kind of have an approach, motivation, response to, oh, that's a good thing, I want to do it, rather than, oh, that's going to take energy and I want to avoid it. So it really goes deep into people's kind of motivations, the approach avoidance relationship between or with physical activity. And that's not something that's easy to manipulate, but people are working on it, specifically people at U Ottawa in the rehabilitation field. So that work is ongoing. I don't know the silver bullet to that, but people are working on it.
That's great, Zach. Yeah, you talk about strokes, and strokes can really happen to anyone, anytime. Not to put that fear in anybody, but the whole concept of prehabilitation, right? If you're going for knee surgery, increasing your physical activity before you go for surgery can actually improve your outcome. So maybe stroke isn't in your future. Let's hope not. But physical activity is always good for us. What I found encouraging about your data, Zach, is that your physical activity levels weren't 4 to 5 times a week. It was more than 1 time a week. Let's just start where we are.
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't kind of athletic level athleticism. It was, do you go for walks a couple times a week kind of thing. That's good moderate physical or moderate to vigorous physical activity. The exact kind of how many steps or how much you need is currently kind of up for debate, but you're absolutely right that it wasn't kind of heavy sports. It was just kind of movement and going for walks a couple times a week.
Said, I guess no work will be done this afternoon as we all go for our 30-minute vigorous walk after this webinar.
Absolutely.
All right, we got a question from Dr. Jaswal here at the Center of Excellence. He says, thank you for your presentation. Based on your study findings, what are some of the key lessons for older population with or at risk of chronic health conditions such as stroke?
I mean, that's a really good question. I don't know if the specific studies that we did here can really speak to that, because one was about kind of preventative before stroke. My assumption would be that similar principles apply, and that you can kind of rebuild functional capacity or strengthen it with kind of physical activity and general health promotion. But I would be kind of hesitant to speak more on that, just because that's the data from the studies can't specifically address that. Thank you for your question.
Perfect. All right, so Kathy's back with another one. Also, Kathy's heard about through the blue zone research that social engagement was an important factor. Did this element impact focus in your study?
Let me pull up the list of the predictors here. So not directly, there were some measurements in the CLSA that would measure things like social engagement. But in the variables that we did find, there would be indirect effect of social engagement. So whether or not people had received care in their home, kind of psychological measures of like distressed and perceived health. But we're asking a really specific question, but probably social aspects go into those measurements. So there wasn't a specific variable about social interactions that kind of made it into the final predictions, but I think that in the background, they were related to some of the measurements that did make the model.
Yeah, that makes sense. My assumption would be that social interactions would not be a negative on this
No, definitely
study,
not.
right? So let's go
Yeah,
out walking together, right? And we'll lose track of time and end up doing 45 minutes instead of the 30 we planned, right?
that's a great idea. Absolutely.
Perfect. Sounds good, Zach. So as we wait for more questions, as you got the variables up as well, just wondering, were there any curveballs thrown at you? Any variables that surprised you that did or did not impact your results?
Well, we had this hypothesis that one's environment would be influential. We had seen some hints of that in the literature. So we did link our data to it's called the CoE data set, but it's measures of greenness in Canadian zip codes essentially. So how much kind of trees and forests are around your house, what's the air quality, how close you are to an overpass, these kind of things. And we thought that these might be influential, but we didn't actually find evidence of that.
Okay.
There are also some issues with kind of measurement, like the way that we measure functional limitations. They're kind of overlap in some of the predictors, like having comorbid conditions, or there's a lot of overlap with measures of frailty. So there are some issues on the measurement front as well.
Gotcha. Perfect. So another comment here. Great presentation, Zach. Kathy found this so interesting. She'd love to learn more about regarding how to overcome barriers for physical activity engagement as you reach towards helping find the silver bullet.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think that's kind of being tackled by a lot of different fields, from implementation science to rehabilitation science to kind of health psychology and public health. I don't think there's a one size fits all barrier kind of way to overcome those barriers. I think the way that is often the case now is we start with the subpopulation that we want to investigate, and then do kind of a barriers enablers study. So what are the things in this particular population that are stopping people or from physical activity, or promotes it, and then creating really tailored interventions based on those for the particular subpopulation, and then assessing those and kind of going through an iterative process. But I think at this point, the low-hanging fruit has been grasped for physical activity. So now people are really, my sense is that people are really focusing on kind of small groups and barriers enablers to kind of subpopulations.
Perfect. Great. So another question here. Could you share what your next study plans are, or what to watch for from others in your realm?
That's a good question. So this is my first year in this kind of context, so I'm still kind of getting the lay of the land. I had talked about the idea of having online calculators. So I think that that's something promising, because we have our algorithm. We know if you put in your data for these 18 variables, that we can get you a predictive value of whether or not you'll have functional limitations or not, based on data from kind of 40,000 people. So So I think a next step was just would be just having a website that's really kind of easy and accessible to use, and you can put in some basic information about yourself, and then kind of get the odds of maintaining functional independence. So I think that that's actually a good next step. That would be a helpful tool for kind of preventative early identification of who's at risk. And I think that's a good first step, next first step.
Absolutely. So, that'd be a great tool for the allied health team as we talk about someone's current health situation, right? Again, not a scare tactic, but a realization of where we're at and what kind of factors are modifiable. What can we do today that will lower our risk for the impact later on? So
Absolutely.
great.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's it for our questions. Maybe we can just wait a few more seconds. Zach, clarify, are you currently doing your PhD, or what stage are you at? I'll ask that dreaded PhD question.
So yeah, I finished my PhD about a year ago. This is
Right.
this is my
Postdoctoral fellowship.
role. Yeah. So the kind of the first year of 2 years. So what's interesting about a postdoc is you kind of work in a field that's related to what you do, but it's also adjacent. So I've been learning, kind of stretching my knowledge base, and it's been really great to be kind of mentored by Matthew Bocante, who's kind of led me through this kind of new a research topic and area as I'm able to kind of apply my my methods expertise to this new area. So it's been a fantastic experience, and of course made possible by Pearly Health Center of Excellence, which I'm grateful for.
Well, we're grateful for your work as well. So of course, I'd like to extend a sincere thanks to you, Zach, for this fabulous presentation. And thank you for all the attendees in today's webinar. We really hope that you enjoyed it. So please stay tuned for information about our upcoming webinar in the next month. In the meantime, if you would like to learn more about the Center of Excellence, our current research projects, or have ideas for upcoming webinars, please reach out and visit our website at pearlyhealth.ca/Center of Excellence. So just a reminder, we would really appreciate if you could complete the short survey when you exit the webinar. Have a great day, everybody.